The Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity, Daniel McAdams, also Libertarian Party National Committee Executive Director, Wes Benedict, and Daniel Shaw, Professor of Latin American and Caribbean Studies at the City University of New York. Gentlemen, welcome to the programme. It seems that post-election doom's being predicted, whoever comes out on top next month. Daniel McAdams, are they correct? Is that what's going to happen?
I don't know if I would foresee a civil war. I could certainly foresee some additional civil unrest. We've seen a lot of civil unrest over the past few months, violence in the street. I don't know if it's risen to the level of a civil war. However, you do have the stakes being very, very high in both parties, of course, wanting to win, which is part of the problem. The part of the problem with the two-party system is that there's so much to give away, and the oligarchs really use the masses to fight their battles.
Where's Benedict? Is more violence ahead, or is it just 2020 talking?
Mostly it's 2020 talking. There may be some instances of violence, but if there is violence, it's mostly going to be between fools on the left and fools on the right, because when you look at the actual policies of the Republicans and Democrats, once they're elected and serve in office, the actual policies are almost the same. They're not really these extremists that the media and that the parties like to make each other out to be.
Professor Shaw, we've talked before about the violence in America this year. Whatever happens in the election, do you think there will be more?
The violence is already here. Ask immigrant America, ask black America, ask poor Americans, ask the 50 million plus people who are out of work, ask the victims and survivors of over 70 fascist attacks on the Black Lives Matter movement. So the systematic violence is our daily diet across this country already, regardless really of who wins, but certainly a Trump victory puts fascism and white supremacy in the driver's seat again for 4 years.
Wes Benedict, no matter who wins then, if there is likely to still be any bubbling trouble, whether it gets worse or any better, even though people don't like to feel that they are influenced, they've got a healthy scepticism for their politicians, it does come from the top down, and there's been fighting talk on both sides, hasn't there? That's going to filter down to through the national psyche, isn't it?
Well, certainly politicians drumming up fear and hate of each other causes people to get scared, and sometimes it incites people to violence. But again, if you look at the actual policies, a lot of the violence in America and a lot of the problems in America are due to policies that Republicans and Democrats support. The war on drugs is a big example. And the reason that blacks in America are incarcerated at such a high rate, the reason that the police have so many opportunities to be in conflict with members of society, and particularly African Americans, is because of the war on drugs in America. And that's something that both Republicans and Democrats have supported. They are softening up on that issue, and I think a lot of it's because libertarians, even if we're not winning the elections, we keep reminding Republicans and Democrats, hey, you are hurting big parts of America with your policies. But that's neither Trump nor Biden has promised to end the war on drugs, whereas the libertarian who I support, Joe Jorgensen, would end it on day one.
Daniel McAdams, even if the H word isn't used, the hate words, the calls for action from disgruntled groups are louder than calls for calm, aren't they? It's a juggernaut that's already been rolling through 2020.
Well, we know it's a strange year. You know, we've had the country shut down for the past 6 months. We've had people who are marginalized economically, who don't have the opportunity to work from home like the elites do, like the oligarchs do, like the white-collar workers do. They have found themselves bearing the brunt of the lockdown policies of the elites in the country, and that has forced people toward desperation. It's forced toward riots. You've had people taking advantage of the sort of social and political and economic dislocation of the mass groups of the United States. So you do have the kindling for unrest. The question is, will the match be lit, and will the match be lit by who, and who will pour gasoline on the fire?
Professor Shaw, every group in America, whether it's split between race lines, ethnic lines, economic lines, whichever it is, each group feels that they've got a problem with whoever's in charge and whoever wins. What difference will it make come November the 4th, even if there is a result that time?
Well, America is indeed as divided, stratified, and polarized as ever. It appears that Trump has no intention of relinquishing power. Of course, he wants to win in the outdated, the inheritance of slave institutions of 1787. He wants to win through the Electoral College. His plan B is to use the Supreme Court if he can get Amy Coney Barrett on there in the next few weeks. And plan C, D, E, and F is to call upon his shock troops on Boogaloo and Proud Boys and whatever fascist elements. We saw earlier today the headline that there was an attempt in Michigan that was planning to kidnap the governor. So these right-wing violent elements are certainly ready at the beck and call of Trump to fly into action, and large segments of the population are very worried about this.
Wes Benedict, these polls aren't exactly based on a massive number of people. It's barely 1,000 each time. As somebody from a political party, no doubt you do research yourself. Does this tally with the things that you find?
Well, if you're looking at the number of people polled, I think a lot of people would respond in a way that, to answer the question, yes, there'll be more violence. Just because over half the people say they might expect more violence doesn't mean that actual violence will happen. I have been watching elections for years and years, and every time a president's up for election, the people in the media say this is the most important election of our lifetimes, and if you don't vote for this bad Republican or this bad Democrat, the world's going to come to the end and we're going to have violence in the streets. So I think it's overblown. In reality, most Americans don't want violence and they won't put up for it. They won't put up with it for very long, whether it's something instigated from the right or the left. Of course, as a libertarian, I wish we'd adopt policies where the government had a lot less power, so it wouldn't really matter much who won the presidency.
Daniel McAdams, a lot of these surveys seem to hover around the 50% mark, even if you take in the margin of error in some of them as well. So does that make it more difficult to read what people are really thinking?
Well, you do have the phenomenon in the U.S. now of people being reluctant to answer polling questions if they're in favor of Trump. There's a feeling of stigma for supporting Trump. So he may well be undercounted. And remember, the polls were massively wrong in 2016. I think the New York Times gave Hillary Clinton a 187% chance of winning, and guess what? She didn't. So the polls are notoriously wrong. They're coming up short. You can basically get anything you want out of a poll if you word the question correctly. So polls very wrong. They have been in the past. They're probably wrong to an extent here. It's difficult to know.
Just our final couple of minutes, I want to get your thoughts on Donald Trump refusing to take part in the next debate. He has been treated for COVID. He doesn't want to do it virtually. But looking with the benefit of hindsight, if you wouldn't mind, gentlemen, Professor Shaw, first of all, would this have happened anyway? Would America be in this state now? Is it 4 years of Trump, or would it have happened anyway?
Well, certainly Trump has downplayed this pandemic. We have now more than 7 million people in this country who've been infected with COVID, 210,000 deaths plus, and never mind those that haven't even been reported, or there were comorbidities. And Trump is not taking this seriously. He's prioritized other things, such as the encirclement of Venezuela, an unspoken war on the Venezuelan people, and the blockade of other countries, an all-out new Cold War against China, and the ongoing Russia phobia that we hear, especially from the liberal media. So the coronavirus has not been his priority. I mean, how is he showing up at the White House as if today was a normal day? Imagine if one of us showed up at the studio or at our jobs when we were still contagious with COVID, trying to downplay it. That signals the wrong things to the rest of the country. I mean, he's barely believed in advocating for masks.
Wes Benedict, Trump's fault or America's fate regardless?
Well, I think coronavirus is natural, and Republicans or Democrats, whoever was in charge, neither could have done much different, and we'd probably see the same. In fact, even if libertarians were in charge of the government, not even libertarians could have stopped the coronavirus from spreading. I think it's unfair to blame either party for it. Now, if we did have much smaller government in America, you'd have more innovation, you'd have quicker medical responses from the private industry, you'd have schools and communities that could set up their own policies, and we'd see, hey, does this work better here, or does this policy work better there? But Democrats and Republicans largely govern the same. They both support Medicare, a big medical industrial complex with big insurance in charge of everything. And so regardless of who would have been in control, we'd have got the same results.
And how would you see it, Daniel McAdams?
Well, I certainly agree with the professor that the president, unfortunately, has been following a neocon foreign policy to a large degree, and that's been a real disappointment for some of us over these last 3 years. However, when you look at this disease, COVID-19, the infection fatality rate is about on par with the flu. It has a 99.9% survival rate, except for some very specific categories of people. So there has been a politicization of a medical problem in the United States, and a lot of the same people that were using Russiagate to try to overturn the 2016 elections glommed on to the idea of using this COVID as a political weapon against President Trump. And that's what they've done, and that's the politicization of the virus. And it's ironic that the Democrats blame Trump for not taking it seriously enough, but at the same time they blame Trump for messing up the economy when he tried to shut things down. So you can't win when you politicize a medical situation like this.
Okay. All right. Well, gentlemen, Wes Benedict, Professor Daniel Shaw and Daniel McAdams, thanks for sharing your thoughts with us on RT this Thursday.